So much for my intro idea. Welcome to $5 Gaming. I promise I will eventually stop making videos on Tony Hawk games, but this is one that I wanted to cover for some time, and I managed to find it for under $5. The year is 2006. Tony Hawk games are still selling millions of copies. Unless your name is Tony Hawk's Downhill Jam. Speaking of, while a new Tony Hawk game hits store shelves every year since 1999, this marked the first time two new Tony Hawk games released in the same year. No 2X, I like you, but you're not a completely new Tony Hawk game. Oversaturation, because when you have a brand name, you don't necessarily need good or unique ideas. The first game to release this year was the aforementioned Downhill Jam, which... yeah, I'd rather not talk about it. The second game? Tony Hawk's Project 8, ironically the 9th game in the franchise, which released only a week or two after Downhill Jam. Come to think of it, even though I didn't have a PS3 or a 360 when this game first came out, I'm still not sure how I missed it because I was and still am a massive fan of the Tony Hawk games. Was there something else that came out around the same time that would have distracted me from a new Tony Hawk game? I mean, no, that wouldn't be... No, definitely not that. While Downhill Jam was a racing-style game pieced together by Toys for Bob, Project 8 was a more traditional Tony Hawk game developed in the warm embrace of Neversoft. Neversoft did develop the 360 and PS3 version, but that's not why we're here, because the version I found for $5 or less was the PS2 version. Yes, I did look for the Xbox version that had the skate deck that came with it, but I couldn't find that for $5 or less. The PS2 version of Project 8 was developed by Shaba Games, a development studio acquired by Activision in 2002 after their work on the PS1 version of Pro Skater 3. So they already had experience making last-gen adaptations of Tony Hawk games. As for what they made outside of that, well, there's Matt Hoffman's Pro BMX, Grind Session, Razor Freestyle Scooter, and... Shrek Super Slam. Super Slam! The next-gen versions of Project 8 ran on a completely new engine, with new animations, new rendering methods, new lighting and shadows, and a shit ton of bloom effects. The future's so bright, I've gotta travel back in time and prevent this from happening. Meanwhile, the last-gen versions ran on the same engine used in prior Tony Hawk games, like American Wasteland. This not only meant adapting the game to an old engine, but fundamentally changing its structure to fit said engine. Either way, they really wanted to drive home the motion capture elements of the game, which the intro makes painfully obvious. I get wanting to show off how awesome the mocap elements look, but considering that in this nearly 2.5 minute long intro, only 5 seconds of footage isn't in slow motion, it manages to be both impressive and kinda dull. Anyway, Tony Hawk and some other pros are in town because he heard that there were a ton of good skaters in the area. He's going to form a team with the 8 best local skaters, and it's up to the player to get noticed, climb the ranks, and join Project 8. You start at the bottom, rank number 200, which means there are more skaters in this town than homes for them to live in. Also, the local skaters mostly consist of people who worked on the game. And Eric Sparrow.
Oh, now check the list. Eric Sparrow, aka the guy who's gonna win Best Trick tomorrow.
You climb the ranks by skating around town and completing various goals for random people. Most goals are divided into 3 tiers, Am, Pro, and Sick, and clearing all 3 tiers helps rise through the ranks faster, which I guess means Tony Hawk is 1. constantly watching every skater in town, and 2, has weird standards for what makes one skater better than the other.
Whoa, Mike just used his skateboard to fix his neighbor's plumbing and stop the polar ice caps from melting. Alright, now he's raising the bar. Let's put him at 25th place.
You create a skater using one of a few templates, though unlike the next-gen version's 5 starter templates, the PS2 version only has 3 options, all of them male. Def Boom Boom Huck Jam, Sex Pistols Roadie, and Lost Child.
Hello, I'd like the Department of Missing Babies.
Please hold.
On top of that, customization options are severely limited. You unlock more as the game goes on, but they're all specific name brand clothing or shoes, and generally don't add much in the way of variety.
Aside from it being kind of depressing how many games later in the series have worse customization options than the earlier entries, this is where the last-gen version of Project 8 and the next-gen version of Project 8 almost play like 2 different games.
To get the most obvious point out of the way, there's no online play for the last-gen versions. However, there also wasn't any online play for the PS3 version, even though the assets for the menus to it are still in that version's data. This is also my chance to make a humble brag that I got the achievement for beating a Project 8 developer, or someone else who beat a Project 8 developer in any match type.
Hey, any developers who are watching this? Stop tying achievements to online play. Entropy's a bitch.
The last-gen version also doesn't have Pro Tricks mode, which allows you to watch the renders of the motion-captured pros performing some of their tricks with a free camera. While it's just a little something extra, it stings that the PS2 version doesn't have this, considering what a massive focus it was for the game, to the point it took up almost the entire intro sequence. In the next-gen version, you skate around the neighborhood and take on challenges to up your rank, but you eventually perform tasks that unlock more of the neighborhood, forming one large open world instead of several separate stages. The PS2 version doesn't/can't do this. Oh, you'll still do the tasks to unlock other parts of the town, but instead of being able to pass through to the next area, you'll see the area open up, only to be immediately blocked off again, and you have to select the new area as a separate level either from a dialogue pop-up or from the menu. I should note that Project 8, both versions of it, tries to compensate for this being the only single-player mode that isn't free skate by incorporating the classic pro skater style of play as a goal in a few areas. Honestly, even though it's the style of play I vastly prefer, I'd rather not have it appear here, since completing all 10 objectives only counts as completing one goal overall. Certain goals in the next-gen version are dynamic parts of the open world. In other words, you don't talk to someone to do them. These largely include challenges for grinding and manualing down certain really long or obtuse paths, launching a certain distance through the air, or gaining a certain amount of height on a quarter pipe. In the last-gen versions, spot challenges are treated the same as the other goals, so doing them outside of the specific challenge doesn't count. In addition, several of them follow entirely different paths, in part because the levels themselves are laid out differently. The last-gen versions don't have the transitional spaces that tie the next-gen world together. Without those, each area can be quite small. To help with this, the developers added more environment pieces and even tacked on extra sections to try and make some areas less confining. For example, this bowling alley in the downtown map is not in the next-gen version. The car factory in the last-gen version is almost nothing like the one in the next-gen version, in large part because buy a Jeep. Because the areas around the factory in the next-gen version aren't in the last-gen versions of Project 8. The 10 areas in the 360 and PS3 versions were condensed to 7 in the last-gen versions, with the slums and hilltop in particular being cut completely.
This is completely unrelated to the game, but As somebody who used to work at a dealership that sold Jeep vehicles, the Wrangler is cool, unless you're talking about that lame poser 4-door version. The Renegade is trash. The Cherokee would show up in maintenance a lot. And the Gladiator is for people who can't decide whether they want a Wrangler or a mid-sized truck and settle for one vehicle that sucks at doing what both of those vehicles do well. That concludes this episode of $50,000 Driving.
Some goals were kept but changed dramatically between versions. Take for example this one from early in the game, Shag Dad's Balls.
Yep, this is a mid-2000s Tony Hawk game, alright.
In the next-gen version, you perform certain tricks, usually involving spine transfers, over flags to catch the golf balls Dad hits. The goal is quick to finish and helps you get used to doing tricks while performing spine transfers. In the last-gen version, this is an annoying scavenger hunt where you track down colored golf balls bigger than your head from all over the map, one by one, before the timer runs out. It's much longer, way more tedious, and doesn't help you get used to the game mechanics at all. Then again, there are some wacky goals that are pretty much unchanged between versions, like breaking into...
What else did Tony Hawk predict?
The filming goals are pretty similar across both versions, but function worse in the last-gen version. I'm not talking about the ones where you do certain tricks in certain locations for a photographer, which are hilarious because in the last-gen version, the photographs almost never show you actually doing the tricks, often ending with pictures of you casually rolling away or barely being in the shot. I'm talking about the ones where you follow a cameraman and do the tricks that get called out. In the next-gen versions, these are usually a challenge, but the cameraman stays pretty close so your tricks will register. If you're too far away, they won't. In the PS2 version, this asshole takes off without you and seems to be making a conscious effort to film you from as far away as possible, ensuring that several of the tricks you do won't count.
How many skateboarding videos have you seen where the cameraman is making a conscious effort to stay as far away from the skateboarder as possible? This guy's like the skate film equivalent of the uncle shooting home videos who just ends up filming the ground and his feet more than anything else.
Meanwhile, other goals are completely different across both versions, either due to missing features, data limitations, development time limitations, or any other number of reasons. The next-gen version of Project 8 has a mechanic where, if you bail, you can control the skater as they ragdoll around and rack up a bigger hospital bill. Think of this as the Tony Hawk version of the insurance fraud activity from the Saints Row games. This is incorporated into several goals, albeit in sometimes frustrating ways. The last-gen versions don't have this mechanic at all, meaning any goal that involved this mechanic was usually replaced with a generic score challenge, or other standard Tony Hawk fare. One goal the last-gen version loves to throw out is following a specific line while doing particular tricks, or types of tricks. The camera sometimes makes it really hard to tell where certain parts of the line are, but that's not the worst thing about this kind of goal. They aren't balanced well at all. Several of these include portions that are either really hard to do or not possible without better stats. Being a person of logic, I thought, alright, I'll come back to these later with better stats and get the 6 score then. When I did that though, I encountered an even bigger problem. The lines for some of these goals are designed for particular points of progression in the game. In other words, by beefing up my stats, I rendered the intended line virtually impossible to complete, as I'd ollie too high or end up moving too fast to do the line as it was intended, forcing me to reinvent the skateboard wheel to finish them. And no, this isn't like some Tony Hawk games where you can lower your stats. When they're set, they're set. Then there's the occasional wholesale removal of content, both presentation-wise and goal-wise. For example, when you meet Mike Vallely in the next-gen version, you help him put on a skate demo and keep various fans entertained until it's over, then unlock his video. When you meet Mike Vallely in the PS2 port, you just do a couple tricks, don't actually speak to him at all, and unlock his video. It really waters down the game as goals end up getting repeated way more often, and several pro interactions were severely cut back, leading to doing the same tasks over and over and over with nothing to spice them up. One of those tasks? Nail the trick. Similar to the game's focus mode, where you can go into slow motion and hit a bunch of tricks, this is a mechanic in which the player can go into slow motion and use the control sticks to move the individual legs of the skater, causing the board to flip and spin different ways multiple times while airborne. It can be initiated whenever by pressing in both control sticks, which is kind of awkward, and when done right, it can rack up a lot of points, particularly with good timing to get faster rotations. Just don't try kicking the board when it's at a bad angle, or you'll bail. In the next-gen version, this is relatively simple to pull off. In the last-gen version, it's George, could you help me out with this one?
Big pain in the ass.
The window for the timing of this on the last-gen version seems much, much smaller, as sometimes I'd bail for no apparent reason. No, wait, no, I wrote that wrong. Replace sometimes with most of the time. There's supposed to be a color-based system to help tell when you can kick the board, but there are 3 problems. 1, I'm colorblind. I couldn't even tell the colors were there until I read about it online. 2, nail the trick usually induces enough bloom to feel like your skater is doing tricks directly in front of a spotlight, making it even harder to see when the colors show up. And 3, there's what feels like input lag in this mode, as I'd make a move, and almost a quarter of a second later, the skater's legs would move.
It should be no surprise then that I tried avoiding nail the trick as much as possible. Although that's not the only in-game mechanic I avoided.
You can do flips, both forward and backward, in both versions of Project 8. In the next-gen version, it's smooth and quick to pull off. In the PS2 version, it's slow, clunky, and tough to land without a massive amount of air. In the last-gen version, the controls when the skater is off the board and running around are fucking abysmal. Trying to turn any direction causes the camera to swing violently to one side, making navigating anything except a massive open space borderline nauseating, and getting the skater to hang from ledges sometimes just refuses to work. There's a stronger boost in speed you can get in the last-gen version by holding forward, but it frequently happened when I would just tap up and cause me to overshoot where I wanted to go. There are several times where wall rides will just break and send you flying in the opposite direction, often ruining whatever goal you were going for. There's a radar on screen in both versions to help see where certain NPCs and their associated goals are, but in the last-gen version, the radar will frequently show NPCs with objectives that you've already finished, or bug out and not show any or almost any of them. Then again, the last-gen version also has a habit of not letting you talk to NPCs at times. I don't know if having the goal menu in this version is to get around these glitches, or if it was just a holdover from the older game engine. One knock against both versions is the lack of a park editor, which is substituted with goals to move a few set pieces around to accomplish an objective. These are just lame. It takes no thought to figure out where to put everything. I'd rather they just not have this at all instead of trying to make a weak compromise. It's not all bad in the last-gen version, as you do get balance indicators that stay on screen as long as a combo stays active, which is pretty handy for when you're switching between manuals and grinds. And while I've been kind of hard on the controls, there's one thing in the last-gen version of Project 8 that controls really well. Lip tricks. The reason they control so well is that this mechanic is entirely broken. Normally in a Tony Hawk game, lip tricks are tough to balance for more than a few seconds. However, balance decay for these in the PS2 version flat out does not work. Instead of the balance meter swaying more to either side, it sways less the longer you're on the lip. Whereas in other Tony Hawk games you can usually stay on the lip for a maximum of 12 to 13 seconds, I could stay in a lip trick mashing combos in this version of Project 8 for almost a full minute. And that's with my invert stat at the default 3 out of 10. Even with the point and multiplier decay, you can still easily crack 100,000 points solely by spamming lip tricks.
If you ever wondered whether there was a Tony Hawk game out there where doing a bunch of lip tricks was actually worth it, now you know.
Of course, that means stats can be delegated to other things, but getting them is a whole other ordeal. In the next-gen version, these just happen in RPG-esque fashion while you're playing. You'll be grinding a ledge or rail and suddenly your grind stat goes up. Or do a bunch of spins and your spin stat goes up. In the PS2 version, you gain 2 stat points seemingly at random when going through the goals. I'm not a fan of either of these methods for stat point progression, but I give the slight edge to the next-gen version because it's less of a mystery what I have to do to get better stats. One other thing that's fine for both versions of the game is the soundtrack. Not only can you still click off tracks you don't want to hear, but you can turn off an entire genre if you really want to. Tons of tracks are included across various genres of music, and nothing struck me as badly out of place or ear-splittingly annoying. The various tracks include Woman by Wolfmother, because that song is in damn near every mid-2000s sports game. Seriously, it's in Madden 07 for God's sake. And various other songs by Ugly Duckling, Nine Inch Nails, Bad Religion, Primus, Gym Class Heroes, and The Dead Milkmen, because someone really wanted Punk Rock Girl in this game.
Punk Rock Girl isn't even in the top 5 of best Dead Milkmen songs.
I'm not going into graphical quality too much because it's a last-gen version of the game on an older engine. Of course it's not going to look as good. The new engine makes the difference even more apparent, thanks to the animations of tricks recorded with motion capture by several pros. That said, the cutscenes are often horrifically ugly, looking like out-of-focus grindhouse movie footage where everyone's mouth is 1.5 times too large for their faces. Both versions have frame rate issues, though mine on the next-gen version seem to be worse than everyone else I know who had the 360 version, and it's my biggest criticism of that version. Whether this is because I'm playing on an original 360, I don't know, and yes, there's an original 360 out there that hasn't crapped out yet, but installing the game to the console helped slightly. Beyond that, there are the kind of graphical hiccups in the last-gen version that can't be ignored. Nail the Trick mode will often have moments where the leg movements don't match the inputs, or they just won't move at all and the board will twist through the air on its own. I lost count of how many times I saw either an NPC or my own skater T-pose either between goals or right before starting them, among other various oddities in animation, like restarting a goal and sliding to one side for no reason.
Slide to the left!
Collision detection is often more of a suggestion than a rule, leading to me clipping through not just things like poles and minor environmental pieces, but also ramps. When this happens in midair, it can not only kill a run, but also make the game borderline unwatchable.
As opposed to my videos, which are borderline unwatchable regardless of what platform you're on. Fucking hell, I knew I should have put this on silent for... Knock off the self-deprecation shtick, it isn't funny. Sincerely, SCXCR. Did I just send a text to deprecate myself for my self-deprecation? How did SCXCR end up receiving a text message from himself? Did he write it in the text field, forget about it, and then accidentally hit send later? But then how do you explain the message being sent from his number to his number at just the right time? Did a future or alternate dimension version of SDXCR call him out for his bad joke? Or is this just a case of a game of telephone gone awry? How did you get into my house?
Pretty early in the game, there's a skate shop where you can unlock special moves and different decks. Let's put aside the lack of unlockable or customizable wheels for a moment. Of all people, Jason Lee told an NPC to tell me all about it. Actually, Jason Lee appears more in the next-gen version, as well as in a video in this game as Coach Frank, who he would also portray in Skate 3. This is where you can start doing tricks in front of random people to earn a currency called tokens, which are then used to buy the special moves and decks for your skateboard. This is true for both the next-gen and the last-gen versions, but the next-gen version handles it much better. The next-gen version skate shop prices everything lower. Special tricks here cost 75 tokens, decks cost 25 tokens, and pro tricks cost 100. The PS2 version skate shop doesn't have pro tricks, but the decks cost 100 tokens a pop, and the special tricks cost 300 tokens each. Goal completion is already a monotonous grind, but unlocking stuff in the skate shop is just painful. Even considering the times in the game where you'll do tricks near spectators just by happenstance. Speaking of, after several hours of goal grinding, I finally got to the point where I was just about in the top 8. But to get there, Tony has one last challenge, and it's not particularly difficult. You do some tricks and hold some inverts while he launches over you and does some tricks of his own. Does flying through the excessive amount of bloom count as a gap bonus? Then you get a bunch of points, then you do one of those nail the trick things, and if that doesn't break, you're done. When you finish this in the next-gen version, Tony and company congratulate you, you see yourself in the top 8, get a readout of your completion stats, and the credits roll. In the last-gen version, just Tony congratulates you, and a text box says you did well, but go for rank 1. No credits, and nothing even close to an ending.
Hold on, I actually have to think about this. I wasn't masochistic enough to 100% Pro Skater 5. But I was masochistic enough to play Ride and Shred to the end. Am I masochistic enough to try and get rank 1 on the PS2 version of Project 8?
Getting rank 1 in the next-gen version involves near completion of the game, completing about 95% of the goals and finding a bunch of gaps and secret spots. Oh, by the way, secret spots? Not in the last-gen version. This unlocks the final challenge, Animal Chin. Named after the legendary ramp from the Peralta film The Search for Animal Chin, which would make an appearance in Skate Heaven in Pro Skater 2 and 1 and 2. This challenge has you start a combo at the top of the Capitol building and keep it going through several different areas, like downtown, the school, the concrete park, and end at the ship in Fun Park. To do it, you have to not just be good at maintaining grind and manual balance, but have a good feel for the world as a whole to carry your line around or across various obstacles. And in the PS2 version, Animal Chin doesn't exist. So getting rank 1 involves exactly what you think it does. Finishing every goal, and getting the 6 score whenever it asks for one. It also means gap hunting, because gaps are technically a goal as well. The PS2 version is both helpful and not helpful in this. Helpful because you can unlock a video for each gap showing where it is, and unhelpful because these videos are sometimes weirdly animated or filmed really far away or from a terrible angle that makes it hard to tell what's going on.
Did the crappy skate filmer make these videos? because that's my headcanon for why they look like this.
The game's really picky about gaps involving a bank drop at the end, because apparently if you don't do that, several of them just won't count. On top of that, there's a pretty clear divide between when one person named the gaps, and when that person got sick and an intern had to fill in for them. The gaps go from names like Ticklin' Ivories and Plant Your Nuts, spelled with a Z because that's Kewlq, to... You know what? Just guess what this gap is called. It's called Stupid. This one? Bwahaha. This one? Clown Hat Surprise. Actually, forget the intern. This was probably the work of a random word generator. Hitting the gaps was a massive chore, but the dread I had for hitting a few hundred gaps across the whole game paled in comparison to my biggest fear in playing this. Corrupted saves. When I started researching this specific version of Project 8, I found thread after thread, post after post, story after story about players who lost all their progress because their save data got corrupted. You can actually hear the game struggling not to fall apart as it tries to figure out what the save function is for. Which is precisely why I had 3 different save files I would rotate through over the course of the game. But you know what? I did it. I found enough of the gaps and completed every goal up to the 6 score. And yes, that includes the lines my stats were too good to do normally, and the annoying filmer goals where the cameraman is constantly running away from me. And when I finally finished the last goal in the game, that's it. A text box, a couple unlocks, and 0 fanfare. At least the next-gen version thought to show you at the top of the ranking list and your list of accomplishments. Here, it's just...
Congratulations, you won!
Okay. You don't even see the credits roll. You have to do that manually from the videos menu. If you did see the credits though, you might notice something off about the music. Several of the song credits are wrong or riddled with typos. Specifically, Stigmata by Ministry is credited, but the in-game tracklist shows it as a remix. Someone couldn't spell the Throwaways' name properly. Wild Child also got their name misspelled. Bitch and Moan by Pardon My Extinguisher isn't censored in the credits, but is censored in the tracklist. 76% Uncertain is credited for Radio, but the song is actually called I Hate the Radio. A few other songs are given the wrong names, or the band names are spelled wrong, but then there's This Job Is Killing Me by the Walkmen. This is actually credited properly, except for one small problem. The song by the Walkmen in this game is not This Job Is Killing Me, it's Tenley Town.
My working hypothesis, and I haven't seen evidence to the contrary of this yet, is that whoever wrote that was projecting their feelings about working on the PS2 version of Project 8 into the credits.
Tony Hawk's Project 8 on 360 and PS3 is a decent game with some tech that still manages to look and feel good today. Even if you're on the 360 version and have to adjust to the controller's crappy D-pad. On the PS2 though, it's a monotonous slog. There's fun to be had in short bursts, but playing it for longer than 15 to 20 minutes at a time makes it apparent just how often you're doing the same goals, how poorly certain things control, and how slapped together the game as a whole feels. And that's all with the looming threat of losing your save data for no apparent reason. This version of Project 8 took the things I didn't like about Pro Skater 4 and cranked them up to 11. All while being generally less functional. Maybe if it were priced lower, I'd feel better about recommending it, but at the $5 ceiling, I can't do that in good conscience. That's somewhat baffling considering this was made by a team with experience making last-gen versions of Tony Hawk games. But for whatever reason, this face planted harder than my skater during Nail the Trick mode. Sadly, Shabbat Games, which was wholly owned by Activision, got shut down by them in the late 2000s.
I hope anybody who was affected by Shabbat's closure at the time managed to land on their feet. You know, unlike me with the PS2 version of Nail the Trick mode. And hopefully, all that snow has melted. Excuse me, I gotta go check this. It's been like 30 minutes, it should be fine now. Really? God damn it. If I would just wait another 30 minutes, but there'd probably be a sandstorm outside or something. Did it really snow at the beginning of the review and then warm up enough to turn into rain? I warned you, I'm going to call the cops.
Top 10